Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Virtual Emergency Preparedness Conference. I'm so glad to have you all here today. My name is Erica Borneman. I'm the Director of Vermont Emergency Management, and I've been tasked and asked and have the very great honor of welcoming everybody to the conference, as well as saying a few words to kick off our conference this year. We do have the distinct pleasure of still being able to come together for collective learning, and that's a great opportunity for us. We certainly miss our in-person emergency preparedness conference and hope to be able to host it in that way next year. But I am so grateful and just incredibly happy that we are able to still continue to come together for some collective learning. Certainly, the emergency management profession over the past 18 months, 20 years, I'm not sure, has been incredibly challenged with a multitude of events that has really pushed emergency managers beyond the limits of where we thought our limits were previously. So welcome today. I hope that you folks have an opportunity to stay with us for the next 3 days or jump in and out. We have some wonderful content and opportunities available for you for some great learning. I want to first start off by thanking our wonderful speakers today, Scott Whittier from the National Weather Service, Peter Steinerman, Jean Nauheimer, Ian Kilburn, and Phil Capizzi. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't give my best gratitude to Emily Harris, Harry Shopman, Rich Cogliano, and Hillary Scott with the Vermont Emergency Management Engagement Team, who really are in charge of putting together this incredible virtual learning opportunity and conference. They are the ones we can attribute our success to for this conference. So thank you all very, very much for your hard work. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily Harris so she can give us a couple of updates on teams and how to navigate within the conference.
Thank you so much, Director Borneman. Hillary, if you could advance to the next slide. So a brief review of today's schedule. We're currently in the welcome portion of today. Immediately following that, we'll be hearing from Scott Whittier on the 10th anniversary of Tropical Storm Irene, a meteorological look back. We'll then have a break. For those of you who were able to join us last year, you'll remember we have a lobby. That's the second calendar appointment that you all received in either your email or as an Outlook appointment. It's an opportunity for you to gather and socialize. In that lobby, people will have the ability to mute and unmute and turn on their video and really have a conversation with each other as well as with Vermont Emergency Management. One way to do that networking and socializing that we're so missing out on. We'll then hear from Vermont Wing Civil Air Patrol, an asset to emergency services and disaster relief. Another break. Preparing in plain language how to make sure everyone is ready in case of an emergency, with another break. And then finally, Vermont Alert Awareness, what it can do and how to become a dispatcher. So we've got a very exciting schedule for today. Hillary, can you advance to the next slide? Just a couple of notes about Microsoft Teams. So as I noted, in this current area that we're in, all attendees will only have access to the chat. They'll also have access to the raise hand or thumbs up or clapping features, as well as looking at a list of who is currently in the room. So those are highlighted on your screen right now. Thank you so much. The yellow icon is, again, your participant list. Directly next to that in blue is the chat icon where you can chat with us and with presenters and reach out to Hillary if you're having any technical errors through there. And then finally, again, the emoticons right there in purple. Once more, once you go over to the lobby during our break, you will have access to the camera and the microphone. Those are not currently highlighted on your screen, but are denoted with the camera that currently has a flash through it and a microphone that also has a flash through it. And that's how you'll turn those on when you migrate to the lobby. Next slide. So I want to take a brief moment to introduce the VEM staff that you're going to be working with today. When you do migrate over to the lobby to socialize and network, you're going to be greeted by Harry Shopman. He's our Northeast Regional Coordinator. He covers Washington, Lamoille, and the Northeast Kingdom, providing planning, training, and exercise assistance in that region. Your event support today is Hillary Scott, our State Training Administrator. She's going to be running some of the IT issues that arise and right now displaying our presentation. If you need any assistance from Hillary, you can feel free to enter a message for her in your chat, or you can send an email to dps.emhstraining@vermont.gov. And then finally, I'm happy to introduce today's Master of Ceremonies, Rich Cogliano, our Southern Regional Coordinator. Rich has 2 cats, and during his off time, he likes to make beautiful products with leather and also has an extensive bow tie collection. With that, I'll turn it over to Rich Cogliano to kick us off.
Modeling one of my bow ties today. Thank you, Emily. Although I think there's a typo, it probably should say Master of Disaster, seeing as I was the watch officer during the only disaster to hit since COVID started. Welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know Director Borneman and Emily have welcomed you and said that they're very excited for this. I am as well. I love this conference, been a part of it since the beginning, and I'm really excited to see all of our speakers today. Now, our first speaker is someone who, if you've been to one of our conferences before, probably does not need much of an introduction. Scott Whittier. He's the warning coordination meteorologist since 2008 with the National Weather Service office in Burlington. And he's been there since 1993. Prior to that, he was with the National Weather Service in Hartford, Connecticut, and Anchorage, Alaska. He has worked several big events locally, including Irene, which he'll be talking about, the ice storm in 1998, and numerous major snowstorms. He was also deployed to the Carolinas for Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Scott strongly believes in planning, mitigation, and exercising with historical storms to bring credibility to the exercises. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we use Scott quite a bit when designing exercises. In fact, our first CADEX in 2010, we consulted Scott and he gave us a track. And when that track came up, it worked for a scenario. I think it was Tropical Storm Zachary was our fake storm. Yet a year later, we had Irene, and the eye of Zachary and the eye of Irene were only about 30 miles apart as they traversed through the state. So we thank Scott so much for all of that wonderful historical knowledge and real event. So I will turn it over to Scott.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
And do you have the presentation right in front of you?
Yes, we have it.
Okay, awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I don't know if Mike Cannon's on or not, but you got the Master of Disaster. Mike Cannon likes to refer to me as the Grim Reaper. So something you and I have in common there, Rich. Again, good afternoon, everyone. I want to go over, since we probably would have a more elaborate 10th anniversary commemorative of Irene if this was in person. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and the reason why we're here right now, I still want to just get a look back at how everything traversed, coming to what we expected with what happened and what we were expecting with Irene. So there we go. So the presentation is going to be more like a timeline and a review of multiple factors: National Hurricane Center forecasts. Some of the products and decision support services that we provided to all of you, and a look back at Irene's track and impacts pretty much all at once. During this presentation, I just want you to think back, go back 10 years to what you were doing during this time, and what, if anything, would you do differently knowing what eventually happened with Irene. So a brief overview: Irene ended up being the second greatest natural disaster in modern history. It's still the 1927 flood of November. That is our number one. Monetary damage from multiple articles, whatever, is generally between $750 and $1 billion in damage for Vermont. I've gotten multiple numbers on the fatalities for the state of Vermont, and somebody can correct me at some point, but I've seen anywhere from 4 to 7. I know of 4 definitely, but I used a couple articles that had 6 and 7. So it's somewhere in there. Just a little bit of climatology about landfall hurricanes in the Northeast, especially here in Vermont. Landfall hurricanes, meaning that their first landfall is in New England, generally about every 15 to 20 years. Tropical storms, maybe a little bit more frequently, whether it's a direct impact across southern New England or whether it's indirect, where it's making landfall into Carolinas before reaching the rest of New England and Vermont. But we also are known of getting remnants of tropical systems even into the Gulf of Mexico. And I think this year really showed that, especially with Ida of just 2 weeks ago, where you had a landfalling hurricane in Louisiana, and yet the remnants from that system made it all the way into the Northeast, and the devastating flash flooding and loss of life that happened in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York. And remember, just before that, you had Henri that produced some flooding, serious flooding in southern New England, and also Fred. So it's been rather active, even without a direct landfalling hurricane. It has been rather active in the Northeast with these systems. So look back at the path for Irene. Irene struck New England on August 28th. It formed, became an official tropical storm on the evening of August 20th. So it took basically 8 days from the Lesser Antilles all the way up to New England. Timeline, excuse me. On Sunday, August 21st was our first mention of Irene in our forecast discussion. First, in the lower left, you can see at the same time frame as we were putting in our discussion, the 5-day forecast from the National Hurricane Center had landfall across Florida with it only as a tropical storm by later in that week. No cone whatsoever into New England, but of course, that's only 5 days out. But we did mention that we thought that the remnants of Irene would more than likely reach the region the following Sunday. Now, on this particular Sunday, we did have a rather potent cold front that moved through the area late Sunday evening, and delivered a pretty good footprint of 1 to 2, even some local areas, more than 2 inches of rainfall across south central and southern Vermont, as you can see here. And that ends up being the antecedent precursor to what ended up happening across the region during Irene. So we move ahead to August 22nd. Irene is at that point threatening Puerto Rico. We ended up putting our first, I think most of you get our what we call heads up emails. They are situational awareness emails on any impactful event that's likely to impact Vermont. We issued those starting on Monday the 22nd, already started with collaboration with our state partners. On Tuesday the 23rd, we were putting various headlines on our webpage to alert the general public of what was going on. We started to issue a lot more public products. Our hazardous weather outlook was already, usually a 5-day outlook, was already issuing something about Irene within 5 days. You can see in the middle there, this is a forecast track from the National Hurricane Center issued on Tuesday, August 23rd. And you can see the 5-day cone still has not reached New England quite yet. But if you were to extrapolate that cone, obviously the heightened awareness of what to expect. Now we move even quicker, and now it is Wednesday, August 24th. Heads up emails are continuing with increased concerns. Some of the highlights out of those heads up emails. Now we're still issuing public products highlighting things, but the direct impact, the direct communications with you folks. One quote was, I think somewhere in New England will ensure a historic flooding event from Irene. Another aspect, another quote was, "We feel that the track is similar enough to Floyd in 1999, where 5 to 7 inches of rain fell across Vermont. Fortunately, in 1999, we were dealing with a severe drought. So when Floyd came, there was very little flooding impacts across the region. But as we all know, 2011 was the year of water. We saw flooding all through the late winter and up until mid-May and June with a lot of rainfall. In fact, 2011 ended up being the wettest year on record for the state of Vermont. So given that we knew of those antecedent conditions, we knew that 5 to 7 inches of rainfall would not have the same impacts in 2011 as they did in 1999. So certainly we were hyping up, and this was the biggest concern. We move forward one more day. It is Thursday, August 25th. You can see that Irene now is a Category 3 hurricane. It's in the northern islands of the Bahamas. You can already see that some of the higher cloud tops, whatever, were starting to approach southeastern United States. Our heads up email, as well, a lot of collaboration calls with VEM and other partners. Certainly we're saying at this point that it is a certain impact for New England with devastating consequences expected. And I was on vacation up until actually reporting at the EOC. So this does not come from me. It comes from somebody in the office. But today's forecast is a dead ringer for the CADEX exercise that was conducted just last year, some 11 months ago. So certainly with that exercise, it allowed us to prepare and know what to potentially expect with Irene. You can see from the Hurricane Center's forecast, at this point, it was looking as a major hurricane, the M there, into the Carolinas. Still being a hurricane, it moves up the mid-Atlantic, and then at some point, downgrading slightly to a tropical storm as it moved up the Connecticut River Valley, which again is pretty scary to what the similarities we had with CADEX the year earlier. So on Friday, August 26th, pretty much the last decision day, as you know, for most workers or most folks are working Monday through Friday, obviously not folks that have to deal with the public safety aspects of it. But on that Friday, we issued high wind, flood watches, and tropical storm watches for the area. You can see in the pink here on the forecast map, those were hurricane watches from the New Hampshire, Maine coast, wrapping around to New York City with hurricane warnings down to the South Carolina border. The products we issued, some of the things that the headlines we had issued: Hurricane Irene will severely impact the North Country Sunday and Sunday night. A widespread significant rainfall event is expected, 3 to 5 inches in the Champlain Valley, 5 to 7 inches across eastern Vermont, with rainfall amounts of this magnitude causing widespread flash flooding across the region. We also had special web pages created, so it was one-stop shopping. So if you went to our web page, instead of clicking on 6, 7 different things to get rainfall estimates, wind estimates, whatever it may be, we were able to put together a simple one page that had all of our watches, warnings, and all the guidance needed available to everybody. Staffing was being arranged earlier for us. One of the considerations we had was working at the ELC during the event, and that ended up coming to fruition, as I'll show you here in a little bit. So with those flood watches, this is what the forecasts were based on the rainfall predictions that we and the Northeast River Forecast Center had. These were the expected crest information for the various rivers. As you can see with the purple icons, major flooding was expected across several rivers across the state of Vermont. Now, some of these did not come to fruition, whereas others exceeded it well above the forecast, including the White River there at West Hartford. But nonetheless, the indication was there that we are going to expect major flooding on the main stem rivers and significant flash flooding on the smaller sub-basins across the region. So here we are the day before Irene. Just think about what
Scott, I think we lost you.
Hello, you there?
We can hear you now.
Okay, where did you lose me, Hillary, or whoever it was?
At the very beginning of the August 27th slide. The slide
Okay.
going back. Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So again, let me reiterate on the 27th, we're a day before the event. You can see that Irene has made landfall across the Carolinas. We are starting to get some of the wispy high clouds from Irene as it's moving on north. This day, we were all in the planning stages and getting ready for increased staffing with 12-hour shifts here, similar with VEM. We were also trying to plan on who was to attend and who wasn't going to be attending a wedding, as one of our coworkers was getting married and still on the afternoon and evening of the 27th. So as we were at the reception and was outside, you could see the cloud bands coming in. And I must say, probably one of the prettiest sunsets I have seen, because you get that with the clouds and with the sun setting, you get kind of a pinkish glow to the sky. Certainly things looking very nice, and who would know, or most of us knew, that within 12 hours from that point, it would be a totally different story. So again, the 4 to 7 inches of rainfall that was forecast, as you can see on this map here, and basically continued wording that the rainfalls of this amount, of this magnitude, would be causing significant flash flooding, widespread flash flooding across the region. So I'm going to go step you through some radars at different locations on the evening of Saturday the 27th and continuing through Sunday the 28th. This radar is out of Fort Dixon, New Jersey. You can see the rain bands moving up across New Jersey and into Long Island, and eventually southern New England, as Irene was still south of the Delmarva Peninsula, but becoming very close. The next loop is coming out of New York City. You can see that the main rain is still down across New York City and points south, but you can see towards the end of this loop between midnight and 2 a.m., the steadier rainfall was starting to move into southern Vermont. We'll let this loop go through one more time so you can see that that occur. Here we are at midnight, 1 a.m., and then the loop ends at 2 a.m. The next loop, this is where it really encompasses and reaches the Vermont border by 8 a.m. At this point, the EOC was activated. People were coming in. I know I was driving down to be at the EOC by 7 a.m., which, as you can see right now, we're driving into the rain at 7 a.m. So the rain's just reaching the Vermont-Canadian border, but the steadier and quite heavy rain has been falling across southern Vermont, especially Bennington and Windham counties, for several hours. And that led to a quick spin up of operations at the EOC, as it wasn't shortly after that we were starting to see some significant flooding reports coming into to the EOC. So here we are on Sunday the 28th. Again, a rainfall arriving in the Vermont-Mass border around midnight, reaching the the Canadian border between 6 and 8. Our statements, flash flood watches, we're expecting major flooding, rapid rises on waterways and streams coming out of their banks. A very dangerous flood situation was developing. Again, we were staffed at the EOC. It's the first time ever this had occurred. First experience I have had being at an EOC, other than the year before, Tropical Storm. Oh, I can't remember the name now. I knew that was going to happen, but I was at FEMA 1 for that event in September of 2010, just before the CAT exercise we had. But the nice thing about it is of having staff at the EOC is we were available for impromptu meetings, whether it was planning section, whether it was the incident commander, whatnot, situational briefings we could do on call, help into the overall situational awareness for the different sections, as well as I know with the governor. And really, it was an eye-opening, and it really helped me out and the staff out as well, because it allowed me to monitor the needs of the state of Vermont and the EOC and anticipate what was needed to allow us to provide the best decision support services possible for you folks, and able to see how the operations run. So I think it was very successful effort, and it was the first time. And since then, I've been deployed, and others have been deployed to the EOC for a major flooding event or a near miss like we had with Sandy in 2012. So this is what it looked like when the sun came up at around 7, 8 o'clock on Sunday. Satellite view, you can see the eye just right there, just outside of New York City and Long Island. Pretty impressive visible satellite picture of Irene. Again, on Irene, flash flood warnings were issued. You'll see as the radar continues to go, these green boxes are the flash flood warnings. They were issued, and you can see how they were issued from south to north. Bennington and Wyndham's first warnings were issued about 9 o'clock. Then here in Burlington, we issued for Rutland and Windsor around 9:30, then across the central part of the state around noon, and then the rest of Vermont had flash flood warnings issued around 3 p.m. The average lead time was generally greater than 2 hours. You can see from the wording in there, flash flooding, small creeks and streams, culverts, road washouts, bridges, just an idea of what the warnings were looking like. And you can see in the top right here, the track from just outside of New York City at 8 a.m., where we already were starting to see flooding in extreme southern Vermont. 11 a.m. along in upstate New York, where we're starting to see some of the flooding closer to central Vermont. Then by 2 p.m., where flooding is occurring across much of the state of Vermont, the actual center of Irene itself is still only in Massachusetts, and eventually reaching the the Mass Vermont border and the Connecticut River Valley about 5 p.m. So here's a look at that radar from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Sunday the 28th. Flash flooding again begins in southern Vermont between 8 and 10, in central Vermont around midday, and thereafter as you move north. Northern Vermont, not as much as central and southern Vermont with the flash flooding. And you can see by 2 p.m., the very end of this loop, whereas the rainfall was already starting to end across the Vermont-Mass border. During this time, there were some evacuation notices. The city of Montpelier sent to residents that were in flood-prone areas an evacuation notice that morning. And then if we look at the radar from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., you can see that the rain is already ending. It's still quite heavy in the northern third of the state up until about 6 o'clock. But for the most part, the rainfall is ended, but the flooding has yet to begin. I mean, the flooding has begun, but the worst of it in terms of the main stem rivers actually occurred when the actual rainfall had ended. So this is a loop, basically a 24-hour loop of rainfall, just so you see how it kind of in one big swoop, one big radar loop on how the rainfall moved across. And you can see the center of Irene right there moving up into the lower Hudson Valley, eventually western Massachusetts, and then through the Connecticut River Valley. So Irene's rainfall, you can see that the yellow is greater than 5 inches. So you can see a large swath of greater than 5 inches, basically the southern half of the state, greater than 6 inches. Likewise, across the southern half of the state, especially along the eastern slopes of the Green Mountains. And then there were pockets of 7 inches or more elsewhere. And you can see from the graphic to the right, the oval representing that highest rainfall amount, and you can see it was along the spines and east of the Green Mountains, that because you had southeasterly winds, so you have winds lifting up the mountain, you just triggered more precipitation potential and more rainfall across the region. So just some of the snapshot pictures of what was going on for the flooding. Again, flash flooding of streams, roads, mudslides occurred anywhere from mid-morning through the afternoon. As the flash flooding aspect started to wind down in the afternoon hours, we started to see the main stem rivers, the Mad River, the Otter Creek, the Winooski, the White River, and several other rivers started to rise significantly during the mid and late afternoon and continue into the evening of the 28th. And you can just see some of the snapshots of the flooding. This, I don't know how I'm going to describe this and do this. When I created this chart, I thought it was neat. I think it's difficult to do it virtually, but I'm going to do my best. So these are 4 snapshots of the 4 main stem rivers that had the more significant flooding across Vermont: the Otter Creek, the Mad River, the Winooski, and the White River. So what is in bold, as you see here, are rises that were, these are all measured in 3-hour intervals. What is bolded in black is any rises that were 3 feet per 3 feet within a 3-hour period. So basically a foot an hour. And then the bold blue is the approximate time and crest level for these rivers. So in southern Vermont, for example, the Otter Creek is a slower responsing river. And as you can see here, its crest didn't occur until 3 a.m. on the 29th, despite the rainfall starting in the basin around 3 a.m. on Sunday. Their greatest rises occurred between noon and 3 p.m. and noon and 6 p.m. But their crest still didn't occur until about 3 a.m. on the 29th. The Mad River, with the mountainous terrain around there, is more of a flashier river, and you can see between noon and 3 p.m. that the Mad River's gauge rose 4.8 feet. The next 3 hours, it rose 5 feet or 4.5 feet. And then the 3 hours after that rose another 5 feet. So in a period of from noon until 9 p.m., the Mad River had jumped its banks and it rose more than 14 feet. The Winooski River, similar story as the Mad. You started to see the rises really taking place around 3 p.m. and then especially between 3 and 6 p.m. with 3-foot rises for 3 hours ending at 3 p.m., then nearly 7 feet ending at 6 p.m., and then starting to go down there with a crest occurring right around 9 p.m. Again, there we saw rises of from its initial stage at 3.7 feet to its peak around 18.8. That's more than 15 feet rises. And then probably the one that surprised me and a lot of folks more because we just don't really see the White River going as hog wild as it did on this event. Generally, a lot of flooding events that we have, we don't have any. We might have minor flooding on the White River. It's very rarely we get moderate to major, but this was definitely an exception. You see, we started at 4 feet by 3 p.m. Just between, let me step back, between noon and 3 p.m. The river rise at West Hartford was 8 feet. Now, the gauge at West Hartford is downstream. The headwaters of the White River is up like in Rochester, Hancock, those areas. So for that flood wave to rise 8 feet in a 3-hour period just tells you what kind of wall of water was coming down a rather pretty decent sized watershed. So 8 feet in a 3-hour period, 6 feet in another 3-hour period, 5 feet, so on and so forth. So we're talking about significant water coming down all our waterways. So just to get a little bit more specific on some of these. So you can see at Otter Creek at Center Rutland, it was the highest recorded historical crest for for the Otter Creek. I believe 1927 would have surpassed that, but there was no data or no estimates of 1927. I would probably believe that 1927 would have surpassed what we had here on the Otter Creek. But no, right now it's Irene. 1938, that was the New England hurricane. This is where this is that New England hurricane that moved up across New England, moving at some 50, 60 miles an hour from southeast to northwest, cut a path right across Vermont. Still as a minimal hurricane, strong tropical storm force winds that not only brought devastating flooding, but did tremendous wind damage and actually decimated the apple crop across the state of Vermont. And that again was the 1938 hurricane. Mad River at Moortown. The gauge site is just upstream from the dam at Bridge Road intersection. I think that's where there's a farm right over just to the right of where I'm indicating here. Again, 1927 had the record crest, but 2011 was not too far away. And sure enough, third was the hurricane of 1938. But you can just see the rate of rise in here and how rapid those waters went, especially this one right here where I'm trying to bring in that middle one between 12 p.m. and 12 a.m. is 6 p.m. And you can just see how the gauge went from near 13 feet at 6 p.m. to 19 feet at around 8 p.m. A rapid, significant wall of water coming down that river. Similar with the Winooski. You can see that rapid rise taking shape and cresting in the late evening. And then the gauge broke at West Hartford. It rose so quickly, and the water in that gauge was so violent that the gauge actually broke. It wasn't until estimates by the U.S. Geological Survey afterward estimated that the river level crested at 28.4 feet, about a foot below the 1927. And once again, following the same theme was the 1938 hurricane. But just seeing these rises here of 17 feet to 21 feet in a matter of about 2 hours, and that wasn't at its peak. So significant wall of water coming down the river. I was mentioning I was at the ELC. A lot of us who are on this call right now were at the ELC, and obviously we were in the Waterbury office complex. If my memory serves me right, up until about 2 weeks prior to Irene, we were in the basement of one of the buildings. We had just moved, or you folks had just moved into the new ELC in time for Irene. A little bit of a timetable here. Just to let you know too, there is a gauge now on that bridge just to the east of the Route 100 bridge there, just east of the state complex, but there was not a gauge in 2011. So I don't have observations because we didn't have the gauge, but I've got observations from what was occurring at Montpelier, that is the MONV1 gauge, and the Mad River, which is MOOV1. But around 5 p.m. that evening, floodwaters from the Winooski started to overspread the fields on the south side of the complex. And we were projecting another 6 to 8 feet of water rising. But again, it was in the fields, hasn't really impacted anything as of yet. About an hour and a half later, flood waters had partially submerged 2 tractor trailers that were in the back lot. I believe one of them housed furniture. But again, they were just partially submerged. It was up to wheel wells, I think, at that point. And there was obviously concern, and nightfall was starting to take place by 2000 or 8 p.m. We could barely see anything. It was really dark. The waters were still going up. And at that point, one of the tractor trailers was being moved by the water. You can see from 1700 to 2000 that the Montpelier gauge had risen 4 feet. The Mad River gauge has risen from 12 to 19 feet. Less than an hour later, several roads in Waterbury had been flooded, with one remaining passable. The fire chief and others were in constant contact with the EOC. Numerous collaboration calls with other officials on what to do or where to go for a backup EOC if you needed to be evacuated. And eventually at around 21:30, the evacuation order was given, and we moved over to where FEMA had a post due to the earlier flooding that they had a joint field office due to the earlier flooding that we had in 2011. So that gives you a time frame on how rapidly things escalated during the evening there in Waterbury. We are hoping to take this data here between the Montpelier gauge and the Mad River gauge, and trying to use that in forecasting future stages for Waterbury itself if we were to have an event like this. And the Northeast River Forecast Center is doing that for us as well. So the flood aftermath, I think you've seen all these pictures. Not only was it infrastructure and personal homes and whatever, it was during crop season, so during the harvest season. So a lot of crops and all the year's work planning and getting the crops ready were gone due to the event. Again, the presidential disaster declaration that was declared. The highest impact areas of the flooding, these are just some of it, but the greatest impacts are largely across northern or basically Rutland, Windsor, and points south, especially on those east-facing communities is where the largest impacts had occurred. Again, it was due to abnormally wet conditions. The diagram on your right shows that the antecedent conditions, we were very wet to extremely wet prior to the event. Of course, the rainfall that we had the week prior didn't help matters. The lower right shows the same thing, that the blues are where conditions were very high on the rivers. And then again, on the left, you can see the actual track with the rainfall amounts. So in summary, again, Irene's the second greatest natural disaster to affect Vermont. Rainfall rates of more than an inch per hour occurred. I think rainfall rates might have gotten up to 2 inches an hour for a very short time, but largely 1 inch per hour, unlike what happened with Ida in the New York area, where they actually had 3-inch or more per rainfall rates. Considerable flash flooding obviously occurred. Major record-breaking main stem flooding, especially across central and southern Vermont. All these rivers that are gauged in Vermont that were in red are new records. Some of them 100-year interval occurrences, some 50-year reoccurrence intervals. And lastly, here was the forecast for the 2021 Atlantic hurricane season with the update on August 4th. 15 to 21 named storms as of Nicholas. That brought us to 13. So we still have a lot of the season to go. 5 hurricanes. That includes Nicholas, as Nicholas was upgraded to a hurricane just before landfall last night. 2 major hurricanes. The upper right shows, whoops, my apologies for that. The upper right shows what's out there right now. There is a disturbed system out around the Bahamas that over the course of the next 5 to 7 days may be tropical, may not. The interest on this one right now, there's no direct expected impacts for Vermont, but we may have to monitor that one. Not so much it would be a significant impact, but several computer models have this thing hanging around until the middle or end of next week, where kind of whatever possibly forms or doesn't form moves up, kind of does a loop between New England and Bermuda, and then just kind of sits and stays there. So we will have to just see how that plays out. And then there's a much more stronger system that's coming off of Africa right now that we'll just have to watch as it's in the historical area for storms that travel from Africa. And you can see in the bottom right here the time frame of the peak tropical season for the Atlantic, and you can see the peak season is September 10th. Here we are today on the 14th. We're slightly going down, but there's a long way to go before we get to the end of the season. And the links here are just some of the various links that are available to you from either the Hurricane Center, our office, Albany's office, or the Northeast River Forecast Center. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and Rich, I will leave it up for questions and for you folks.
Thanks, Scott. So, folks, if you are on a state government machine or a state government account, you should be able to chat or type questions into the chat. If you're not, you may have to save any questions for the lobby, which we will switch over to in a few minutes. But if you have a question, I encourage you, go into the chat, type your question. While we're waiting on a couple questions to pop up, Scott, I have a couple. I guess if we have a big event coming up, so this orange system you showed us in the Atlantic, it does a little dog leg to the left, and it's going to come right at Vermont. If I want to forecast for my community, is that something I can work through you on?
Yeah, if there's any questions on any forecast, whether it's this or anything, absolutely, you can call us direct, or those heads up emails that we send out have our contact information, our 24/7 phone as well as email. So certainly reach out to them. If you're Bennington and Windham, your first avenue probably should be Albany, since they provide the service. But as state liaison office, we collaborate with Albany pretty closely, and generally much of the state meetings are led by us, with Albany providing any subject matter expert for Bennington and Windham when the time comes. So certainly reach out to us or Albany for any questions you may have of forecasts.
All right. Talking about events, and not just weather events, but if I'm hosting a community gathering in my town, couple hundred people, vendors, hot dogs, food trucks, music, the whole shebang, pretending COVID doesn't exist. If I'm doing that and I want to know, gee, can I expect thunderstorms? Can I expect some problems? Is that something you can help us with too?
Absolutely, Rich. We always say, and I think, and you folks say as well, as hope is not a plan. If you've got something going on, you've got a fair, a festival, something like that. If we have the emergency manager we can only by congressional authorization work through some sort of emergency management official. So if you've got an event that is weather sensitive, we ask that you work through your local EM, and then they can contact us and we can provide them with monitoring current weather conditions for potential thunderstorms, or giving them a planning forecast several days in advance.
Great, that's awesome. River levels, you showed some great charts there with the river gauges and the forecasts. Is there a one-stop shop for looking at that?
Yes, on our website, if you go to weather.gov/BTV, our home website, you'll see a series of tabs. One of the tabs on there will say rivers and lakes. Just put your mouse over river and lakes, click on river observations or river forecasts, and they will give you current and forecast information. Now, the caveat on that is not all rivers are gauged by the USGS, and not all of those gauged rivers are forecast for future conditions by the Northeast River Forecast Center. It's just a matter of funding. There's just no funding available, federal or state, to gauge and forecast everything. But you'll see on there what sites are forecastable, engaged, and what sites are not.
Okay. One final thing. A lot of communities will approach folks like me or Harry and say, hey, we want to do an exercise and we want to do something focused on an ice storm or a hurricane or whatever. If we want to get something that could actually happen, we can work with you on that too?
Absolutely. As we did with CADX, as we did with, was it CADX 40, the recovery phase or something like that. I worked with Eric on that. Absolutely. What we try to do here, I've saw so many exercises in Mid-Atlantic being run that had these crazy scenarios that people just wouldn't buy. And I have found out that exercising with past weather situations, or maybe something that is the next stage up, or maybe like a 10%, one standard deviation above what historically has happened, if you can tell those people in the exercise that we're going by a historical event, we're going by something that has happened, and more than likely with climate change, it's going to happen again, and maybe one level higher, that if you can bring realism to these exercises, people will learn more from that exercise and be more prepared for when that next event occurs.
Awesome. That's exciting. So hopefully all of you EMDs out there listen to what Scott just said. We're willing to work with you and help you get the best exercise we can using the best information. So with that, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So if people have questions, feel free to type them in. If not, the other link that was sent out, either as an Outlook appointment, depending if you use Outlook, or just through your email, is a link to our lobby. Scott will be moving over to the lobby, and you can turn on your camera, you can turn on your mic, and you can chat with Scott or any of the other EMDs, emergency management staff, or anyone else in that lobby. Now, I have 121 on my computer. Our next presentation is at 1:45, so that gives us, math was never my strong suit, 24 minutes. Gives us 24 minutes. Go over, chat. You're all virtual, so if you need to grab a drink or a snack or a cookie, hopefully you baked them last night or this morning. Go enjoy that, and we'll see you back here in this room at 1:45. And that is time, folks. Welcome back from break. Hopefully you're all back sitting in your chairs, ready to go. Our next speaker is Lieutenant Peter Steinerman. He is the Public Affairs Wing Historian and Aerospace Education Officer of the Vermont Wing of the Civil Air Patrol. He's been a member for 8 years and also serves as airborne photographer, mission scanner, and mission observer in his air crew responsibilities. Previously, Peter served for 10 years with CERT, an emergency services organization that assists first responders in New York. The Civil Air Patrol has afforded Peter an unusual and gratifying opportunity to combine his passion for aviation with volunteer service to the communities of Vermont. Peter will be talking about the Vermont Wing Civil Air Patrol, an asset to emergency services and disaster relief. Peter, it's all you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and I apologize for not having my video up after a lot of embarrassing episodes. I've learned that sometimes the video link in this part of Vermont will collapse it for miles around. So I assure you I'm a real person, and in fact, I am dressed in my polo shirt uniform this afternoon. I thank you all for taking the time to join me, and look forward to providing an introduction to the Civil Air Patrol here in Vermont. And at the close, I'll be happy to answer any questions I can. I'm speaking on behalf of Colonel Richard Beach, who is an active Guard member and a longtime member of the Civil Air Patrol. So Hillary, if you would call it, there you go. Okay. So the Civil Air Patrol in Vermont and nationwide has a long history of service, assisting the military in our role as the volunteer auxiliary of the U.S. Air Force. It was launched literally just before Pearl Harbor, December 1st, 1941, where a lot of civilian pilots around particularly in the coastal areas, were looking to help defend the homeland against the Nazi submarine threat. And they contributed a great deal. Many of our early members lost their lives in this service. They were successful in spotting almost 200 Nazi submarines and attacked 57, as you see there, by dropping bombs by hand out the cockpit window, and in fact sank 2 of them. Since that time, our role has expanded, particularly with the Federal Authority for our service in 1948, when the 1946, when the Air Force became a separate branch of the armed forces. This built on our earlier missions: Homeland Security, search and rescue, emergency transport of personnel and cargo, border patrol, forest fire spotting, and flight training. Some of these are not operable anymore, particularly the air defense a mission that we had back then, though we do serve a small function then, helping to provide slow-moving targets for a lot of U.S. Air Force units around the country. I also want to note that we, per the earlier presentation you just heard on Tropical Storm Irene, the Vermont Wing and other units of the Civil Air Patrol provided disaster imagery following Irene and Sandy, and also where I lived in New York at the time. The Vermont Wing and many other wings flew down to New York and provided FEMA with thousands of images helping to document the destruction from those natural disasters. Hillary, you're moving around very quickly here. If I can, there you go. Okay, so our overall mission statement, and thank you, Hillary, for your help. Supporting America's communities with emergency response, diverse aviation and ground services, youth programming and promotion of airspace and cyber power. And I'll be talking a little bit about each of those. One of the unheralded missions of the Civil Air Patrol is aerospace education, something I've been very involved with for the past few years. And that promoting understanding and the importance of airspace and related services to our Americans' financial health and the security of the country is an important mission for us. Hillary, if you can give me the next program, please. Next slide. There you go. So emergency services, as we mentioned earlier, included search and rescue. One of our missions up here in Vermont is helping to look for lost hikers and missing aircraft, for example. Defense support for civil authorities, that includes personnel transport, emergency supplies transport. We did that a lot nationwide, and providing vaccines to remote communities with our Cessna aircraft. Homeland Security, counter drug, it should be fairly self-explanatory. ROTC and junior ROTC flights, we just completed several missions this past weekend with Air Force ROTC cadets at Norwich University, familiarizing them with flight. A lot of them had never flown before. We give them the experience of sitting in the front seat of a powered aircraft. Something we also do for our cadets. We used to do a great deal of unmanned aerial aircraft chase to help guide them into airspace over the homeland. That I don't think is an active mission anymore. And of course, sensor test and evaluation. We do that, for example, with the Department of Forestry up here in Vermont and other government agencies. Hillary, the next slide, please. There we go. So cadet program is something, as I mentioned earlier, we have an unusual program if you compare it to the Boy Scouts and other similar youth programming around the country. It's leadership and core values, of course, integrity, physical fitness, history, and of course, scientific education as far as aerospace. Character development, leadership opportunities are some of the key programs that are done on a weekly basis in our three composite squadrons up here in Vermont. Aerospace education, as I mentioned, I'm director of aerospace education. I provide monthly lessons in history and current events to many of our squadrons. I've personally gone into many high schools and elementary schools up here in northern Vermont talking about, for the younger kids, things that how does an airplane fly, for example, what makes a rocket fly, what's going on in space that week, whether it's a space station or satellite launches. The kids are very appreciative. They especially love when I bring in some of my colleagues who have served, and they can talk about their service flying in the various branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. They get very excited about that, and it's a thrill to help bring them along in somehow you can serve the country through aviation and just being a member of the military. We're not a recruitment arm of any of the branches, but it's something that we all like to talk about. For the older kids, especially, it might suggest some alternative careers for those who might not be considering any college education. We talk about careers in aerospace, also with those. Just in general, I've brought to high school classes up here, executives from JetBlue, from several large FBOs up here, aerospace companies such as Beta Technologies, all of them talking about career opportunities that are possible with a college education or without a college education, something I think is an important lesson in these times. Hillary, next slide, please. Thank you. This talks about the exact details of our charter vis-a-vis the U.S. Air Force and our volunteer designation in the various tax codes, and of course our different responsibilities to the various emergency services throughout the United States. Hillary, thank you for the next one. Okay, this I will not talk in detail, but basically it talks where we fall in under the various commands in the Air Force and to whom we report. All of our airplane rescue missions, for example, are directed to the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, and that helps streamline getting access to our different squadrons around the country and directing us to the right site for example, missing commercial or civilian aircraft that we're able to assist with. And I'll talk more about that later. Hillary, next slide, please. Thank you. The different regions, Vermont wing is with the Northeast region, and we exercise with all of the wings in this region fairly often, several times a year, on massive imagery and other kind of exercises following a hypothetical national disaster. This is a very important slide. Civil Air Patrol is also referred to as a cost. You stay on this one, Hillary. Thank you. Cost-effective multiplier. Our Cessna aircraft are remarkably efficient in terms of cost, costing about $165 an hour. We also bring to that an ability to fly for several hours as opposed to some other airframes out there. I've been on missions that have lasted 6 or 7 hours all around Vermont on photographic reconnaissance missions, carrying 2 or 3 people and perhaps some light cargo as well, or to fill up the back seat, whatever the weight limits are. But that's something that we'd like to emphasize, that we provide a very cost-effective platform for search and rescue and the other services we provide. Hillary, next slide, please. So emergency services, this is something that we're very proud of course, providing rapid response to whatever emergencies are put in front of us, missing aircraft, as I mentioned, disaster relief. With a Cessna aircraft, you can fly very relatively high speed and loiter over an area looking for whether it's damage for photography or missing personnel or aircraft, as I mentioned. The loitering is an extremely valuable capability of the Cessna 172 and 182. And our pilots are, of course, quite proficient and expert and experienced in the various types of flying required in the mountains of Vermont. And I'm very proud of working with these men and women. Next slide, please, Hillary. Oh, some of the different missions I flew on several years ago, what's called the Fertile Keynote mission, the intercept training, where the local guard units get to practice on intercepting a slow-flying general aviation aircraft, where we provide a target for the interceptors, the F-16s, and so forth. I don't know if they're doing that yet with the F-35s in Vermont. I don't think they are, but I'm sure that's in the future. I mentioned about the UAV support. That's something they did for several years, just helping clear the airspace around the various Reapers and so forth that might be coming into various Air Force bases up in this part of the country and other parts of the country. Perimeter surveys, that's something that I've participated in as well, just flying a line on the ground and taking pictures around certain real estate or infrastructure as directed by FEMA or other government agencies. We're able to get to sites, as I mentioned, fairly quickly in visual flight rules conditions and get those photographs uploaded within a few minutes of our landing back at our mission base or any other available support site. Next slide, Hillary, please. Back to my favorite subject, aerospace education. I've had a lot of fun with that. The kids are terrific. I remember I worked several years with Cambridge Elementary before the pandemic up here, and I would get, in talking about, let's say, the importance of volunteer service in Vermont, I would ask the kids a question like, what does Vermont not have a lot of? I was, of course, referring to people, the need to volunteer. But the responses from these first graders or second graders usually came to something like pandas or something that they didn't think we had enough of. So that they were, but the questions usually were very intelligent, very entertaining, and hopefully I imparted some information and some inspiration from the lessons and the biographies I presented. I also these programs also involve field trips to airports and giving a lot of these kids their first close look at airplanes. I remember I took a class from Barry about 2 years ago. It was frankly one of the best days of my life. A lot of the kids had never seen an airplane up close. A lot of them had never been to Burlington and the Burlington airport, certainly. So introducing them to the personnel at the airport, the personnel who helped us at the Guard, who gave us a great tour of their equipment and services. It was several of the parents had written me, several parents in this 5th and 6th grade class, that it was one of the best days of their kids' lives. And that meant a lot to me. And I invite everyone out there in the audience to join with us in this educational mission and to help bring aerospace and emergency services a little closer as far as information and opportunity to a lot of the youth in Vermont. Let's see what else. So we talk about military service. That's very important. I have no military background, but I am enthusiastic about the opportunities it does offer a lot of the youth in Vermont. And as I mentioned, we frequently bring in officers and veterans to talk to the kids about their experience and the gratifying careers that they've had in service to our country. Cyber emphasis, there is an active cyber education program at Civil Air Patrol helping high school students get educated about the opportunities in cyber defense, and we have some programs that are very accessible to them, and I know it's a very popular choice for a lot of those in the Vermont cadet squadrons. Next slide, please, Hillary. This covers some of the things I've already talked about. This is the Civil Air Patrol is a gateway for a lot of our cadets into the military, Air Force, Army, and of course the Marines and Navy. Maybe not so much, but certainly they're very drawn to the aerospace. Several of our cadets have gone on to the service academies. I know Colonel Breckville, the former commander of the Vermont Wing, 2 of her children had gone into service academies, and she talks quite enthusiastically about how Civil Air Patrol helped her kids be more qualified for those service academies, West Point and the U.S. Air Force Academy, to name two. A lot of our members are Air Force Academy and West Point graduates, and they're very enthusiastic about bringing those opportunities to a lot of our cadets. Several of our cadets I know have become qualified private pilots, got their PPLs as an adjunct to their service in the Civil Air Patrol here in Vermont, and went on to become aviators for the Marine Corps and the U.S. Air Force. Let's see, thank you, Hillary. Next slide, please. All right, in the Vermont wing, we have, we have approximately 200 members, 6 squadrons based all around the state, the largest being here in South Burlington at Burlington International Airport. Hillary, can you go back one, please? I've just not finished. The smaller squadrons, Bennington, Rutland, Springfield, Montpelier, Barry has a very large contingent. The Bennington squadron has just stood up their cadet cadre, and they're having an enormous success in recruiting young Vermonters to their program. I think they're grown to about 20 cadets in the space of 3 months, and Captain Mercer and Captain Friday are exemplary leaders and educators in that regard. And any of the people online listening who have families down in Bennington and have an interest in this, I encourage you to get in touch with them about the opportunities there. Springfield, all of these, several of these squadrons participated in the recent Thunder over New Hampshire air show, providing backup, working various services there on a volunteer basis to support the air show. And they do that, all of the cadets do that on a regular basis when the opportunity presents itself. And they have a lot of fun doing that. We get to meet other cadets from other wings, and of course get involved in a lot of very interesting aviation events. Next slide, please, Hillary. So this is an introduction to our 2 airframes we have in Vermont. We have a Cessna 172, which is the older model. That I believe is with our Bennington squadron. The technical information is all there. These are, I had never sat in the back seat of a Cessna before joining the Civil Air Patrol. I was able to fit in very comfortably, much to my astonishment. And the crews generally are 3 people: the mission pilot, the mission observer in the right front seat, and the airborne photographer in the back seat. So we sometimes, when it's not possible to have 3, we have 2 people. Obviously, the mission pilot and the photographer can sit in the front right, performing his or her duties, taking photographs of the ground. All of the equipment obviously is state of the art. We have ELT finders. If you look in the back of that aircraft, you'll see the antenna on the bottom for the electronic locator beacon searches that we rotate from the cockpit to get a good bearing on beacons from downed aircraft or missing hikers. That takes all of this takes a bit of training, obviously, to get comfortable with, and that's an ongoing process. We have exercises generally once a month, sometimes more often. Next slide, please, Hillary. Okay, this is the newer airframe. We have a relatively new Cessna 182 up in Burlington. That's got a state-of-the-art Garmin 1000 cockpit display that I'm, even after a few years, still getting comfortable with using the navigational equipment, but past few missions, I've gotten pretty good at it. So there's a lot of training, a lot of resources available to get you up to speed, even if you haven't been in the cockpit for a while, as it was my experience following the slowdown during the pandemic. One of the missions is flying. There's a reference there to an airborne tactical repeater. This is a 45, 50-pound unit that we snug into the back seat, and is a repeater for ground communications, something we call hybrid flights. to enable ground units to talk to each other with a lot more reliability. That's probably one of the more boring missions, orbiting over a search area, for example, but a very valuable one. The other missions that we do are laid out there. These are very powerful aircraft, obviously for a single engine propeller plane, very reliable and very safe, I might add. All of the planes are exquisitely maintained, and we take a lot of pride in that. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions I can after the presentation. Reference to the airborne imagery, that as a handheld, I think there were some efforts to mount some cameras on the wings that could be operated through an iPad. I don't think that was successful, so it fell to the airborne photographers like myself to sit in the back and handheld use a Nikon camera with a zoom lens that we take ground pictures with. Infrastructure, obviously disaster-related damage, any other targets requested of us from FEMA and other agencies. As I mentioned briefly, we have a long-standing and unusual collaboration with the Forestry and Parks Department up here in Vermont, helping them monitor the health of Vermont forests through photography and airborne, bringing up some of their experts in the backseat of the plane so they can observe firsthand damage being done by the ash borer, for example, and help map that out. And I think that's a collaboration we've had now for 3 years in a row, and it's frankly very valuable and terribly interesting to as I've learned more about it. That's it. Hillary, next slide, please. All right, so 2021, we changed our mission slightly to accommodate the needs of Vermont communities for disaster relief. I personally participated in some of these pandemic support missions, but that was done by all of our senior members and cadets all around the state, helping provide making and providing PPEs for a lot of hospital workers around the state, helping the Guard distribute packages of food to Vermonters in need during that crisis, and we stand ready, of course, to do that again. SARX drills, I mentioned to you, the electronic locator searches, a wide range of missions that are and scenarios that are keep it very interesting for us. The Department of Forestry missions I mentioned, and this October, Captain Kelly Sutton Bosley is planning the Wing's first encampment over 4 weekends in October of our cadets to get a very in-depth training in whether it's aerospace education, search skills, physical skills, and other things that I know I've not participated in myself, but I know our older members had done a lot of these encampments in the past, and they found it very enriching and very memorable. That's just some of the accomplishments. And also, I believe our membership grew during the pandemic and afterwards, a nice accomplishment and testament to our leadership in the Wing. Next slide, please, Hillary. To accomplish a lot of these other missions, obviously, we need things on the ground. Cessna 182s don't do well on the interstate, so we have to rely on four-wheeled vehicles to take our cadets to various events, to get to site searches as required for our ground teams to get out and deploy with the first responders to help as needed. The ground teams especially are trained with the emergency locator beacon technology to help them locate aircraft and missing skiers and flyers as requested. We're a relatively small wing. I know some of the wings around the country have literally dozens of these vehicles, hundreds of aircraft. But we have enough for our needs, I believe, at this point. Next slide, please, Hillary. Communications equipment, this is not my strong suit. We have, I believe we have everything for different scenarios, to help support emergency services in the field. We have a trailer that's kitted out with numerous radio sets to help, as I mentioned, the link establishment around the state. This all helps keep the ground and air crews coordinated and, of course, in touch with first responders and our incident commanders in the Civil Air Patrol and the other services that we work with. Next slide, please, Hillary. This breaks down our various types of personnel. I'm one of the mission observers. Incident commanders all trained in the ICS system, all certified. I think we've added one or two to that. Mission-based staff fluctuates. But there's plenty of room for growth. There's plenty of opportunities to bring your different skills and interests to any number of missions that we have on an ongoing basis in the Vermont wing. And I welcome any and all of you to contact us about where you might fit. A lot of people interested in indulging their interest in radio communications, I think will find a great home with us. For example, you do not have to be a pilot to join the Civil Air Patrol. I am not a pilot. But I've had a lot of fun, and the people are great. So this is hopefully giving you a taste of what we do and what we can accomplish. Next slide, Hillary. Capabilities I've mentioned. These have all of these have been put to work in the pandemic. It's not only by Vermont Wing, but by other wings around the country. As I mentioned, transporting vaccine supplies to remote communities was a critical mission for a lot of our colleagues around the country. Of course, tissue and organ transport. A lot of our colleagues do transport search dogs for the state police. That's something I don't believe we've done in the Vermont wing, but I think we stand ready to help with that as needed. The airborne support for radio communications, I mentioned about the tactical repeaters that we have carried in the back seat of our Cessnas to help support ground communications in rough terrain. Next slide, please, Hillary. This is the trailer I mentioned, rapid deployment communications trailer that we can bring to help support internet and radio communications in disaster scenes. And we have several of our personnel very well trained to help operate that, and they exercise with that, I believe, several times a month, 12 months a year, of course. Next slide, please, Hillary. More detail on how we communicate the ground teams versus communicating to our airborne teams. We exercise with that fairly regularly, helping vector in ground teams to a crash site or a simulated crash site or to a missing person or missing aircraft, something that we exercise with quite regularly. All of it obviously controlled through the incident command staff back at our mission base, whether that's in Burlington or the other squadron sites or even mobile bases for that. Next slide, please, Hillary. An overview of the high frequency support communications that Civil Air Patrol provides, and I know which are exercised on a regular basis. See, it's got pretty excellent coverage all around the state. Colonel Lazari is our resident expert in all of these communications. I know he'd be pleased to answer any questions you have on that. And I know a lot of you are obviously much more familiar with this technology than I am, and I apologize for that. But there's a lot to be said about this, and a lot of capability in here in Vermont that you should be very proud of. Next slide, please, Hillary. This is a very active area for Civil Air Patrol. Obviously, it's something not well known. Is helping identify, locate missing persons through their cell phones by vectoring in from the nearest towers around the country. Again, not a capability that I can talk in depth about, but it's an unheralded capability and a contribution from the Civil Air Patrol in Vermont and elsewhere. And if you have questions on how that can be deployed for your various agencies, I'd be happy to put you in touch with our resident experts on that. Next slide, please, Hillary. Costs, we mentioned we're a volunteer service. You can insert a volunteer joke there if you want, but I'm very proud of that. Very cost effective in terms of fuel, in terms of equipment. All of it is paid for. Excuse me, the airframes are paid for by the U.S. Air Force. The costs, there is some billing. Obviously, it's got to be set up for different missions that help us better meet the needs of our local agencies and the national agencies. But again, much cheaper to fly volunteers in a Cessna aircraft than a lot of other fixed wing and, of course, helicopter airframes when those aren't available, or something with a Cessna might be more preferable for the mission requirements, photography, and so forth. Happy to try to answer any questions there that we can. Next slide, please, Hillary. This is something very self-explanatory, how to get in touch with us, get us deployed to help your various agencies. We get to work for you. It has to come from the top. Of course, you can reach us directly. Colonel Beach can presumably help make that go a lot more quickly. But for most requests, it has to come through the Air Force or the CAP National Operations Center down in Alabama, I believe. But we can be reached directly and get things in motion for whatever the mission may be. Next slide, please, Hillary. Again, a review of our organization and our responsibilities, where the tasking and so forth comes from within the National Defense Establishment. And of course, we also work with civil agencies very frequently, as well as I mentioned, FEMA and others. Next slide, please, Hillary. Another view of how to get us working for you on a specific mission or generally, and they're very responsive, obviously, in getting us off the ground or getting our teams in vans when needed. And we're very proud of that, of course, and we practice for that all the time. Next slide, please, Hillary. So this is how to reach us directly. Our headquarters is at Burlington International Airport, and can be reached directly there. And Colonel Beach, I can provide you his number as well if that would enhance access. But we're very responsive for obvious reasons through our central phone number. Next, Hillary, please. That ends my presentation. I hope I've provided some insight, a good introduction to what we do. I'm very proud of what we do. I hope that's clear. I've learned a lot. The people are terrific, all great aviators, all of them great Americans, and we're very eager to get to work for all of you when the situation arises. And perhaps maybe some of you might consider joining our work with us, and of course, be happy to talk about that. Hillary, I think that concludes it. If I can take any questions, I'm happy to do so, of course.
Lieutenant, thank you so much for presenting on the Civil Air Patrol. As we did before, folks, if you have questions, put them into the chat box, and I will read them off as they come in. And if you prefer to speak your questions, you can go over to the lobby in a few minutes. Lieutenant Steinerman will be there, and he'll be able to chat with you one-on-one. While we're waiting for people to put in a chat, I just want to say my experience with the Civil Air Patrol. I think it was back in 2006. It was one of the first Vermont Yankee exercises I did. We asked Civil Air Patrol to just do a flyover of the plant during the exercise. And if you've ever been a part of a Vermont Yankee exercise, they had a very strict schedule. It started on usual event, alert, site area emergency, lunch break, and general emergency when you had the really bad stuff. it was during our lunch break, I got a radio call from some of our folks that were down there saying this is a real world emergency. We've had a train derailment in Putney. So we ended up tasking Civil Air Patrol while they were flying over Vermont Yankee, just do a quick little run up the train tracks and get aerial photographs of the train derailment. Our director was down in Washington, D.C. at the time, I believe, and within an hour of getting word that there had been a derailment, our director in D.C. on a BlackBerry, mind you, remember, this was before iPhones, on a BlackBerry had pictures from the Civil Air Patrol of the train derailment. So the Civil Air Patrol is a great, awesome asset, and Lieutenant, thank you so much for presenting and talking about that.
Thank you. I hope it did it justice, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing any questions come up in the chat. Nope, nothing so far. So folks, like before, we're going to migrate over to the lobby. You can put this on hold. Just click the link. We did share the link in the chat earlier while everyone was on break before. So you can click that link, go over to the lobby. You can turn on your camera, turn on your microphone, chat back and forth, talk to Lieutenant Steinerman or any of the emergency management staff that are over there. The link was just posted again. So we now have 21 minutes until our next presentation. And so we will see you back here in 21 minutes. Thanks, folks.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right. Hi, everyone. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back from break. If you missed the very beginning of our conference so far, my name is Rich Cogliano. I am your Master of Ceremonies for the next 3 days, provided I don't crash and burn at some point. So our next speaker is Jean Nauheimer. She is a professional communications professional at the University of Vermont Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is passionate about equitable access to information, and she has received national recognition for her accessible web content from the Web AIM project. Jean also provides, training on best practices for digital storytelling, information dissemination, and building accessible documents to UVM communicators and organizations around Vermont. Jean is going to talk to us today about preparing in plain language, how to make sure everyone is ready in case of emergency. And given the amount of communicating we at VEM and all of you as local emergency managers do to your community, I think it's going to be great to hear how we can best reach our constituents in times of emergency and disaster. Jean, it's all you.
Thank you so much. I do want to make sure that I am showing not the, you guys are seeing presenter view, so I'm going to stop sharing and reshare really quickly to make sure that we don't have you looking at the wrong screen. I hope you all are enjoying your conference today. This presentation has been like a year in the making as we kind of transitioned from being able to do anything at all to maybe we can do this online to being back to being a conference presenter. So I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jean Nauheimer. I use she, her pronouns, and we are hopefully going to see the correct screen this time. And this presentation is about incorporating plain language into your emergency planning. So I just want to start off by saying that this is probably, oh goodness, okay, this is probably not going to be any especially groundbreaking information that you're going to hear today. A lot of this is going to look pretty similar to content that you have somewhere in your head. The goal for today is really to make sure that you have a better thematic approach for how to address the content that you want to get out and make sure that you're doing it in a way that's not only going to help your own organizational capacity and save you some time, but also make sure that you're really refocusing on those important pieces of communication with your audiences. So we'll start out really, really basic with what plain language is. By definition, it is simple, clear communication that allows your audience to find what they need, understand what they find, and then use that information to meet their needs. There's also a federal law that was enacted in 2010, and the technical writing in it, which I find so ironic, is to enhance citizen access to government information and services by establishing that government documents issued to public must be written clearly and for other purposes. So some really good examples of not plain language utilized for the federal law. This is part of all federal units are supposed to have plain language plans. And we'll talk a little bit more about like what that can look like and where we actually see or what entities in the federal government have good good plans and good practices that you as a State Department could potentially benefit from. I do also want to say that while I'm going to be speaking specifically about like language and organization today, another really big component of the readability factor and access to information that goes along with plain language is making sure that you have helpful visuals along with your words. So at the end of this, I'm going to make sure that we have time to go over a resource guide. I've already shared it in the chat. I hope most of you can see along with the PowerPoint. I know that's always a big ask at conferences. So if you have, if you want to look through those resources, there's a lot more information on the imagery that you can be using to help further clarify your messaging, and also some resources about where you can get access to images. Okay. So who benefits from plain language? As many rhetorical questions at conferences go, the answer is everybody. Our audience is going to be the biggest benefactor, especially for English language learners and new Americans. And we know that the population in the state of Vermont is becoming more diverse year after year. We want to make sure that we are providing every one of our citizens access to information in an equitable manner. And language barriers are a huge challenge with that inequity. This is also especially helpful for Vermonters with cognitive disabilities or impairments, and that can be over a spectrum of individuals and also of ages. We want to make sure that we are creating content that can be easily digested for the broadest group possible. This will also help you as planners and you as responders. Not only is it really helpful for our organizational capacity, it also helps facilitate more efficient content creation. It helps reduce confusion for the general public in the case of an emergency. And it also provides some common language and knowledge, which is something that, especially in emergencies, you want to make sure that you all have, you're all working from a common knowledge well, otherwise it can get very chaotic very quickly. So I wanted to get some examples out here of what some very like specialized language may look like. And I don't know how many baseball fans we have in the audience today. I pretty much stopped watching baseball when I got to Vermont. I am a New Yorker, so I had to go with something that talked about the Yankees and the Red Sox, even if the Yankees did not win in this one. But if you are a baseball fan, you may know that baseball has very specialized jargon that has evolved over the course of the game. And so I wanted to give you all a moment to look at this and see if you can figure out what happened exactly in these two sentences in this recap. And I know that we don't have a ton of access, or not everybody may have access to the chat, but if you do, I would really love to see if anybody feels confident in trying to explain a little bit about what happened here. This might not be the best platform for this kind of engagement, so we can move along quickly if this doesn't work too well. But if there's any brave participants who thinks that they may have some options, I would love to hear. It's the 9th inning with a runner on second and 2 outs. Okay. would be hard to follow. Oh, it went out. Okay. So Randy, I am curious, what does it mean to be in the 9th inning if I've never watched baseball? Yes, once again, New York loses to the Red Sox. Thank you, Jason. Okay, so we have a pitcher who struck out both Ellsbury and Teixeira and swinging to end the game. So what does a strikeout mean? If you've never encountered baseball before, what do you think that would mean? I would explain that usually a game ends in the 9th inning. Thank you, Randy. And then Ian says last inning, we're tied. Last inning, unless we're tied, Yankees are at home as home team finishing the game. Okay, so what does it mean? What does an inning mean, and what does it mean to be the home team? Why is that important in this instance? An inning ends when the defense gets 3 outs. Okay, cool. So what I'm seeing right now, this is really interesting. I've never gotten to do this over chat before, so this is fun to see everybody chiming in, and I appreciate this because like we are really piecing together what it's like to play baseball right now and what that sport looks like. If somebody's really unfamiliar with it or has never never watched it. So Yankees were destined to lose the game anyway from Randy, and I think it is defined in Annex to a baseball SOP. So we're piecing this together, but now it's getting kind of long, right? What winds up happening here is that we get a little bit. We try to explain some of the more technical pieces or the pieces that had. That weren't maybe written out in very clear language. Like you had to be a big baseball fan or a follower of the game to understand what they meant. So then we take a step back and we try to explain that bit. But then every time we take that step back and we build out, we're actually making this a longer process. And that's something that somebody is going to have to then remember all the pieces of the game. It looks like we have Liz say the Yankees almost pulled out a win at the end of the baseball game, but the Red Sox were able to clutch the win by striking out the last batter. So I think that's a pretty good summary, Liz. I really appreciate that. And I would say we could even be simplifying that a little bit more. The Yankees almost pulled out a win. Something exciting happened, right? We have a lot of dynamic, but then they lost as we had Randy say, because the Yankees usually lose. My mom will be very upset to hear me say that. Yeah, we had a game. There was almost an upset, and then there wasn't. Keeping things simple and not getting bogged down in all of the technical pieces that we may have to take a step back to try to explain again is going to be a really beneficial component of trying to get information quickly out to our community. We obviously, in cases of emergency, want to make sure that we have everything that we need to ensure that we're pointing our audience or community members into safety and not towards danger. But we also want to make sure that we're not giving them more information than they need in a way that will then wind up potentially confusing them or taking so long to explain that we're negating the process of giving them content to begin with. So here are some of the basics for plain language. As I go through these, I just want to give you like a heads up that you don't need to have an amazing grasp on like the specifics of English language grammar to be a very effective plain language writer. You also similarly, it may be helpful in discussing this if we go over some terminology and there's some questions about the terminology, that's fine. But basically, we want to keep this as simple as possible. And while we do, especially as if you are a communicator or if you're somebody that just really likes writing or reading in that fact, you know that having complex structures is something that we usually like to see as consumers because it's more engaging and will keep our interest going. But there's a way to make engaging content that is not going to overly complicate a message. And so in these instances specifically, using like reader-centered material is going to be really helpful. Writing your content in second person, so you are actively engaging your audience that way by saying, hey, you, this is a message for you. If we are in a state of flooding, we want you to go here. We also want to use active voice and tenses, so we don't want to slip into passive states where we're talking more about the structure or the state and not necessarily like the subject, or the person. So always trying to stay in those kinds of voices, and tense. Also, we want to avoid using past tense or overly complicated tenses. Sticking in simple present tense is a great way to get your message across. Similarly, you want to be using short sentences and paragraphs. Globs of text, whether they're on a screen or on a poster or in a letter, can be really boring to look at, and it can make it even more of a challenge to engage in. So keep your content short and concise whenever possible. And when that's not entirely possible, or even if it is, using lists, headers, and tables is a really great way to break up that information and also have your reader be able to scan something quickly and get a better idea of whether or not it's something that is going to be helpful for them or if it's pertinent to them. Things to avoid is a lot of background information or giving a ton of context where you might not need it. I know especially if you are somebody that is in the planning process or is doing grant writing, that requires a lot of that background information and that contextualization. And this is an area where you can really be shedding that if you're going to be sharing content with the public. You want to be avoiding passive voices and complex sentence structures, large blocks of text, and as often as possible, avoid idiomatic expressions, figurative language, and multisyllable words. Multisyllable words will increase your reading level pretty quickly. There are going to be exceptions to that. There are more general words, especially if you're working with specific populations. A lot of my background is in the disability field, and so language like paraprofessional, while many syllables is something that almost anybody who is in the disability or special education realm would recognize that word very quickly. But making sure that you're using, whenever you have the opportunity to use a simpler word, that you're choosing that simpler word. Similarly, jargon and acronyms can slow down the absorption of information. You are constantly thinking, one, if you don't know the jargon, that can detract, but also acronyms, if it's especially something that is rather unique and not universally used, it is likely to delay learning. It may result in a Google tangent, and then your audience may not get the information that they need. And so as we're looking at the organization component of creating content in plain language, the three biggest components of this and kind of like your starting points should really be always starting with your audience. What is it that they need to know, and how do they regularly access information, and how do they most availably have access to that information? A lot of the times when we're talking about plain language, or we're talking about communicating with our public, we are seeing things like putting things on public-facing websites, potentially doing some PSAs that are video or commercial, and even sometimes like having posters or flyers, but making sure that those are targeting every component of our population, especially now as our demographics are changing a little bit. I know we are comfortable using the internet to facilitate a lot of our learning here with this system. How much of rural Vermont still has access to reliable internet? Or do we have families in schools whose children may have access to the internet at home and who may be English language learners, but we have parents at home who do not speak English and who do not have access to the internet? Making sure that we have, and how are they getting their information? What organizations are they involved in? And who do we know who we can be communicating with? Making sure that we're identifying all the ways in which we need to communicate with our audience, as well as exactly who our audience is going to be one of the biggest time savers you can have while you're planning for external communications, or even if it's an internal plan that you know will eventually lead to external communications. Next up would be breaking information up logically. Again, nothing really new here. This isn't a very dynamic and enthralling piece of literature that you're writing. You want to basically give the most important piece of information right up front. You want to make it big. You want to make sure that everybody sees exactly what they need to know. You're not surprising anybody with this information, right? We want them all to know exactly what you need them to know. And then put the rest of the information in order of that importance. We can use design and formatting features to help convey the message, and that will also improve accessibility. So headings and sections within our Word documents, on our websites, even on print materials, having those delineated can be really helpful. Also, utilizing lists and tables when appropriate is a great way to just section out your information. It gives a better visual cue. And if you are interested more in the accessibility components of that, especially the digital accessibility of that, it also helps individuals who use screen readers get to information faster. Okay, and so we're going to go rogue and go out of the PowerPoint here for a second, and I wanted to talk a little bit about converting content that you may have already established into something that is a little bit simpler. So forgive me while we see what happens when I go out. Oh, it's already up. That's lovely. I'm going to go into 560 something days ago when we were all first learning about COVID, and share a memo that was written by Dan French. And you can see here that the original audience was to superintendents and principals. And this is, I hope everybody can see this, so I'm going to just pop out just for a second. So you might not be able to read the text entirely, but that's okay. And just to look at the breakdown of this article, of this memo. So we have the audience address right up top, and then we start with a little bit of background information, and then in bold, as of February 28th, 2020, there are no cases of people with COVID-19 in Vermont. Okay. We then go into listing some of the precautions that can help the spread of disease, and we have a bulleted list, and then we have a few more chunks of text, and we have a nice heading here on additional guidance, information for families on academic and vacation travel. We also have responding to a potential COVID-19 case, and school cleaning and disinfection, and who to contact for additional information. Okay, then additional resources. So in this 3-page memo, we have a lot of the content that we had talked about already, as far as pieces to consider when you're using plain language. We have lists, we have headers. We can, if maybe if you guys have like the thumbs up button, if you want to give me like a thumbs up if you think that this conveyed the most important piece of information first. We can see if that works. Got it. Okay. Didn't get a ton of thumbs up. So if somebody wants to use the chat and say maybe maybe we, yeah, if there's something that you think maybe should have come before the announcement that there were no cases of COVID-19 at the end of February 2020, please submit them in the chat. And then I'm also going to see, this may be a little bit more convenient for those of you who have access to the chat. I'm just going to put that URL to that memo in there so that I can continue to share my screen back in presentation mode, and we'll go back to our second piece. Okay. And so the next thing that I would like to look at this with you, and this can be a little bit more of a mental exercise as we don't have the best. I'm also fine if we want to continue to have like a little bit of a popcorn chat in the chat box. That'd be great. If this message, instead of being sent out to principals and superintendents, was going to be sent to the families of school-aged children, what are some of the things that you would change about it? What would you do with the language level? What would you do with the order of information? What would you do with the document structure? If we have anybody that has some thoughts on that, I would love to hear them. We'll give you guys another like 2 minutes and see. We have Dot saying first change the level of language, then add that there are no current cases, use symbols for hand washing, etc. I think that is great, Dot. I know that this may be a little bit challenging to be thinking about a memo that you might not see, focusing on the students. Great contribution, Lee. And we have Diane saying, keep language simple, put the most important information in the first paragraph, and also in the last paragraph, repeat what the most important takeaway is. And then we have Heather saying, simplify the language, put the precautions first, and then that the schools will monitor the situation afterward. And Ian says, strip it down to the most important information, less technical, likely a one-pager. 1 page, yes, 1 page, yes. I agree too that this, especially if yours is going home to families, you want all the information that you want to give them on 1 page. And as we're talking about more pictures and more visuals, yes, I do. I love the idea of having like the hand washing icons on there. That is really great, and also shifting that focus to prevention, right? Like that is what we want to do as we are responding and preparing for emergencies. We want to make sure that we are doing what we can to prevent before we are talking about having to respond. Okay, cool. More pictures, more visuals. Great. Thank you, guys. And yeah, I think that as some of the things that I would also recommend is taking it completely out of that memo form. You know, I think that that might be something that we are used to seeing as state employees. We certainly send a lot of memos at UVM, and I think that that's something that just even that form of, you know, having a lot of content on the first 20% of the page is probably not going to be helpful here. Just get that message big and bold in the top, and making sure that you also save room for pointing people into a new direction for if they have further questions after steps about prevention. Okay, and so going now into, I think I skipped, no, I did not skip a slide. Okay, so incorporating plain language into content that you either are writing or you are writing for a different audience, or something that you maybe have already started writing. I would always recommend considering the broadest possible audience first. If you can build with that in mind, you are going to wind up saving time at the end when you have to go through and think about, okay, who is missing from the reach of this, and why are they missing? Both of those barriers will then just add on extra time at the end of this. And I will say, as a communicator, and I'm sure that you all, if you are not in communication positions yourself, the communicators that you work with will really, really, really appreciate having content that they don't have to rewrite in a bunch of different ways before they can share it across broader channels. So being able to think about everybody, or as many people as you can from the get-go, will be absolutely a good first step. You can also use that simpler language to inform your heading and section titles, and utilizing things like summaries or table of contents will also help you keep your organizational component good in your own planning, but it will also be really simple to switch that out into something that could be like a one-pager that you're sending out to a broader audience. Build in the habit of writing short and to the point introductory sentences for paragraphs or sections. This might go back to third or fourth grade for a lot of you, when you were learning how to take notes and in textbooks, and finding that, or if you were trying to skim a lot of homework in one night, reading those first sentences and last sentences and paragraphs are usually the best way to get your information. Make sure that as a practitioner, you are still following that rule of giving those pieces of information in the most concise way possible, in those summary senses at the beginnings of your sentences. Those again can be pulled out to make shorter content very quickly. And as you're developing, if you're in different phases of writing internal plans, or if you're writing grants, that will also be very helpful for just anybody that has to read them, approve them. You'll probably get high marks for your grant writing, and it can always be filled in with more details. And these last two big bullets here, I think are really important. And these may be steps that will take a little bit more effort and will be very much worth it. First is developing a common language between you and the contributors and the stakeholders that you're working with. This is, again, this is front loading some of the work, but once you have common language or a decision of how you are going to be talking about specific scenarios or specific plans, that will save a lot of time and confusion in the long run. And learning from your community members, you are all doing this work because you want to be serving your community. You want to make your community better and keep them safe, and ensuring that you are taking their feedback is going to be really helpful for your next steps and the next stages of your planning. I would always recommend, if you do not have advisory boards, to try to make connections with others in the community, especially those areas that you think your audience engagement or reach is not the strongest, so that you can make sure that you're doing a good job with your messaging to them. And I would also say that you want to make sure that you are compensating people for their work in this. This is very important work. This can literally save lives. And so you want to make sure that the input that you're soliciting is something that the community also recognizes as valuable, and that they see that value. So I have a bunch of resources here. I wanted to make sure that we were leaving a bunch of time for conversation and general questions. And I would be happy to go over some of these resources. I also created a Word document that I shared at the beginning of this session that we can look at together if you'd like. The Word document has a little bit more language and gives fleshes out some of these resources a little bit more for you. But these are basically places that you can go if you are interested in getting a little bit more information on plain language, or if you are looking to just firm up those skills. There's a combination of checklists, general information, technical assistance, consult services, really a whole bunch of stuff. So I wanted to make sure that we had this time for for going through some stuff and questions. I feel like that might be a good thing to do together. So I'm wondering if it would be okay if we maybe move into the break room now. If I could get a yes or a no, that would be lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. It is 3:20. Our next presentation, our final one of the day, actually follows up on this a little bit. We're talking to Ian Kilburn about Vermont Alert, which is our mass messaging tool that we put out, and how towns can use this to alert their citizens. So that will be in 25 minutes. So now is a great time for folks to transition over to the lobby, the breakout room, and to talk directly with Eugene and figure out which one of these resources is the best, and how do we communicate better in plain language.
Thank you so much. I will see you guys over there.
All right. Thank you. All right, folks, welcome back. I am so excited to see everybody back from break. We have one final presentation left from today, or left for today, I should say. Our final presentation is Vermont Alert Awareness, what it can do and how to become a dispatcher. We have two presenters. We're so lucky. Ian Kilburn is our first presenter. He is the Vermont Emergency Management VT Alert Administrator. Ian has been with Vermont Emergency Management since October 2019, so just before COVID, and serves as one of our watch officers. Ian has worked in many aspects of public safety throughout Vermont, has a deep passion for the Vermont Alert program, and has a very active Instagram account sharing pictures of his dog, Blue. Phil Capizzi is the second presenter for this. He is the Everbridge Technical Account Manager who is assigned to the state of Vermont Everbridge deployment. Phil has been supporting Vermont Emergency Management, Vermont Department of Health, Vermont Department of Corrections during his time as the Technical Account Manager. He also supports Vermont's neighbors to our south, including New York City Emergency Management, New York City agencies, the state of Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, City of Boston, Boston Emergency Management, and Boston Police, Fire, and EMS departments. He lives in Massachusetts with his wife, Siobhan, who attended Middlebury College, apparently go Panthers, and his two sons, Leonardo and Theodore. So join me in welcoming Ian and Phil for our final presentation of the day.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rich. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So welcome everyone. Thanks for staying with us here. I know it kind of runs into the later afternoon on a nice, beautiful day. That's usually how it is. But hey, you finally have some Red Sox fans in representation. So let's get a little round of applause going for that. So again, my name is Ian Kilburn, and with me is Phil Capizzi. And we'll just jump right into it, everyone. So again, Ian Kilburn here. I've been with the division since October 2019. My entire adult life has been in public service. I've worked as an EMS responder, a dispatcher. Go Rays. All right, Dan. So I really do have a deep-rooted passion in alert and warning and just general public service. Phil.
Thank you. Hi, guys. So I am coming up on 3 years now at Everbridge. I've been dedicated to Vermont for about 2. Sort of a parallel life to Ian. I did have some public services, 911 EMS in the city of Boston for a handful of years, mostly during college. Did a lot with emergency management in that time. Was not working during the marathon bombings, thank God, but had plenty of friends that were. So big crises and public response to them, something that's near and dear to me, especially having been in the city when that whole thing went down. So I've been supporting the team here. Ian is your guru, so all questions absolutely go to him, but I'm here to support as well and help keep the system running at full capacity. And I do want to say that Vermont has been one of the leaders in terms of Everbridge deployments at the state level for quite some time. So it is an honor and a privilege to be able to work with you guys and support the effort here. So thanks for giving us a little time today.
All right. So just a little background history on the VT Alert program. So coordination to implement and develop a mass notification tool to alert Vermont citizens began around 2010. We launched the VT Alert program in 2013. And that really was an all-encompassing organization. Everything lived in one catch-all container. And then 2017, we transitioned over to the Everbridge platform, where we still title the program as VT Alert, but it is one piece of the overall picture here. So Phil, nothing like a vocab lesson, so take it away for this.
Thank you. Yeah, always happy to teach more vocabulary. So I know we're at the end of the day, guys. I'll do my best to keep my stuff interesting. I know this can get a little bit dry. Everbridge terminology, right? So we have a new system here. You may or may not have some exposure to it. We have some core, terminology that you'll probably want to get used to. We have acronyms too, but we won't go into those today. Contacts. So if someone can receive a message from Everbridge via a text message, an email, a phone call, that person's a contact. All right. That's what we call a contact in our system. So it's somebody who receives our messages. User would be this group here today. So people that have administrative capability within the platform can go in there, send those messages that our contacts would receive. And then, be able to go in there and facilitate that message sending potentially from a higher level. So Ian is both a user and a contact for the Vermont system because he lives in the state. I am simply a user due to the fact that I do not live there and receive the public alerting. I mean, I do for testing purposes, but we'll pretend I don't. So I would be just a user. Manager is another title we have floating around in there, sort of a subset of a user. It just now gets into a specific level of access within the system that you have. We have dispatchers, which highlighting here, we can actually manage and send out messages, schedule notifications to go out ahead of time, manage any active alerting the system is pushing out, leverage some of the visual capabilities we have in what's called the Universe tab. And then a group manager is sort of a separate level of access from a dispatcher. And you have basically controlled messaging that you're able to send to predefined groups ahead of time. And those levels of access here, dispatcher and group manager, both managed by myself and Ian as the administrators at the higher level of level of access within the system. An organization, if we refer to an org or an organization, is simply the silo where your Everbridge information will live, right? So if you are supporting public alerting through VT Alert, we have reverse 911 data that lives in the VT Alert organization, right? So it's siloed, it stays there, it doesn't bleed over into the Department of Corrections, for example, or Vermont Department of Health. And then location data. So within our platform, we do have the ability to assign location data to a contact, right? So if you were someone who wanted to put in your home address when you sign up and opt into the system as a contact, you could do that, right? You could choose to provide that information to the system, and then the system can use that information to send you geo-targeted and geo-specific messaging when those alerts go out.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. I know a vocab lesson isn't really what you were all signed up for, but it does play a key component in what we're describing going forward here. So what is VT Alert? So the Vermont Department of Public Safety, Division of Emergency Management, we utilize the Everbridge platform as its mass notification tool, both for the public, which is the VT Alert organization, as well as many other organizations, groups, subgroups for targeted group notifications, and we'll get into that a little bit. Really, the key here is that quick dissemination of emergency information by utilizing multiple delivery methods. We're in a very connected world these days where we have multiple lines of ways of receiving information, so we can utilize and target that. Again, VT Alert is our public-facing organization. This number here, the 32,629, was current as of last night. That are all of our subscribers within that system. So it's kind of a drop in the pan when you take into consideration the entire population of Vermont, but we're steadily growing even over my tenure. And then we utilize a subscription plan, so to speak, where when you sign up and create an account, in order to receive notifications, you can kind of sign up for what the information in which you want to receive. So included in that is not limited to this. Trust me, I've got a big splash screen that shows how many different types of alerts you can send out via VT Alert. But here's just some of the highlighted ones. We do have the automated weather alerts that come over through the National Weather Service. Road closures, missing persons, structure and wildland fires, the list goes on. So trained dispatchers, as Phil highlighted earlier, whose agencies or municipalities who have adopted the program are able to send notifications out. Those include, municipal governments, state agencies, nonprofit organizations. We also have the public alerting capability through IPAWS, or the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. This is a program kind of co-led by FEMA and the Federal Communications Commission. And both FEMA, the FCC, as well as Everbridge provide us guidance in how to send messages through these capabilities. Comprising the IPAWS system are two separate pieces there. There's the emergency alert system, which is broadcast media, and the wireless emergency alert system, formerly known as CMAS, or WIA as it's referred to in its short code. Those are the push notifications to your cell phones. The nice thing about IPAWS is we don't need to target our 32,000 and change subscribers. We can push this message out a little bit further and a little wider net to get our emergency communications out there. Specific to IPAWS, the Division of Emergency Management is the only alerting authority for the state of Vermont. So if you need that level of notification sent out, you do need to contact us, and that flows through our watch officer, something that Brett might speak on tomorrow. So And here's my shameless plug. If you don't have an account, please sign up today. You can follow the links via vtalert.gov and create your account. So Phil, as we get into the different ways in which we can notify people, do you mind just explaining the different channels and different methods just real quick for everyone?
Yeah, can do. So one thing, sort of a major designation, I think here is what Ian dropped right on the slide is we have outbound communication methods that are supportive of, I would say, non-emergency use cases and then immediate life safety use cases. So the first example that comes to mind would be under IPAWS, WIA, or EAS, a tornado warning, active tornado warning from the National Weather Service, right? That is an immediate life safety threat. That is going to leverage something like IPAWS and WIA. Those specific delivery methods are reserved for those times where, people imminently could be, hurt or killed by something that's going on. That's sort of separate from the other ones that you see here, although these can all be used in unison to get the word out that something bad has happened. I'm going to call out one thing here. I don't know if the 300,000 simultaneous phone calls is an accurate number. I think it's actually higher than that, just to toot our own horn a little bit here. But Everbridge is built, it's built on the network capabilities that we have now as a state. So what I'm getting at is we're only as good as what we're built upon, right? So while there may be some ways that I can send somebody a message, we may be lacking cell coverage in certain parts of the state, right? That happens all the time. To make up for gaps in delivery capability, we support, I think it's somewhere around 40 different modalities, what we call modalities, or ways that we can deliver a message out. We have our Everbridge app. There's my shameless plug, right? So that is owned by Everbridge. It's an endpoint where we can send messages. It's the fastest, it's the most secure. It has geo-targeted alerting. So if you download it and you're in the state of Vermont, you cross over to our home here down in Massachusetts, and we have an active alert out for an Amber Alert or something like that. You would get that when you come into the state through the Everbridge app, right? Because you can choose to let it use your location in the background and give you those geolocated alerts as they're coming through. More traditionally, I can send it to you via email, right? So you can, through that opt-in process, if we're just talking about VT Alert for the public alerting, if you find VT Alert, you create your profile. You can provide me 1, 2, 3, 4 email addresses for your profile if that's something you think would be relevant to you. Cellular-based outreach, I can send to SMS-capable devices. I can send one-way SMS. I can send plain text emails, plain text SMS. I can push out to mobile and landline phones. So I can have a sort of automated voice play a message back to you if you pick up that phone when it rings. I can support TTY device delivery, and sort of, with the message equity piece that was brought up before, our efforts to remake part of the VT Alert system are going to support multilingual messaging, in the next year or so, right? So essentially we'll be able to come in here, hit all of these delivery methods and deliver a message across 5 or 6 different languages with the push of 1 or 2 buttons. So outside of everything else on the left that I just talked about, we can also publish out to endpoints, right? And this is where we start to cross the threshold on the Twitter and Facebook block here into more of publishing for the public and less about targeted messaging. So if you were to so choose, you could take your Twitter account, your Facebook account for your agency, your public facing pages, connect that to Everbridge, and we could push out the content of your broadcast to those 2 endpoints to, again, increase the coverage and increase the likelihood that people are actually going to see your message that you're pushing out.
Great, thanks, Phil. And that 300,000, that's probably some old data back when we first started. So my apologies on that, my friend. And one thing here at the bottom, by default, the VT Alert organization is set up so that we have confirmation. So if you acknowledge the message on one of these modalities, it will stop the escalation process. So you can put in your 10 different ways to be bothered by us over here at VEM. And once you confirm that, you will stop that process. And that actually helps us a lot on the back end of things to just see how successful our message is, how many people are at least opening it enough to confirm the message. So not only public notifications, a big piece of this presentation is really talking about public alerting, again, which is our VT Alert organization. But we have a lot of other applications, some other things, irons in the fire, so to speak, coming down the pike. But specifically to the municipalities, when we implement and roll out VT Alert for your municipality, we also give you access to an internal, what we call the VT Municipalities organization, so that you can set up your own internal group notifications. And some of the applications that we've had, and pretty good use cases and success rates there. Notifications for local road crews for emergent conditions. When I dispatched for 9 years at the Shelburne PD, we had to hand dial in our entire road crew during a snowstorm. This, essentially can take care of all of that. Instead of having to go one by one and just making a phone call, we can send them a text message, an app push, an email, and then a robocall. I guess robocall is not really the best term, but that's what I use. We also can use it for your local emergency operations center activations. We use it here in VEM as our initial activation notification. And then notifications to city and town leadership for emergent situations, state agency folks, emergent staffing needs for disaster response. The Agency of Transportation uses is one of our organizations. They use that as a kind of a polling measure or to call in staff. Safety notifications to employees. I know Jason Goslin is here on the phone. He has done immense work with the Agency of Human Services and their safety program and communicating with all employees of the agency. Special teams deployments. Vermont State Police use this for their special teams, their search and rescue, drug recognition experts, and the list continues, so on and so forth. And then nonprofit organizations responsible for some public safety functions or public safety interests. Employee notifications, again, for dangerous conditions. Some special teams that are kind of built in there. We do have a critical incident stress management team that utilizes this platform. So lots of different use cases, just not only just the public facing side of things.
Again, I think one thing to keep in mind too is if you're chewing on an idea or a way that you think you might be able to leverage Everbridge, or just keep in mind, it doesn't have to be for emergency messaging, right? So if you have an activation process or an SOP that you're trying to figure out how to mobilize everyone toward, we can step in and provide some insights and some guidance on how we might be able to do that. Everbridge is not a replacement, obviously, for those things, but it can fit into those processes to make life a little bit easier for you guys, right? That's always what we want to come away doing, is making things a little bit easier. So don't worry about the emergency use cases. We can help with those, obviously, but the day-to-day operational type of use is really where we're probably going to see a lot of value for anyone that's interested in getting access to Everbridge.
Yeah, great point, Phil. So kind of pulling back and going to our more municipal targets. So towns and cities can adopt and implement VT Alert, again, for that public-facing public safety messaging via the VT Alert organization. We strip you down to limit only to your municipal boundaries, because that is, your constituency. Those are the people that you're responsible for. Some typical types of notifiers: emergency management directors, police and fire officers, highway foremen, dispatchers. And then again, as I am a VEM watch officer, another little shameless plug, if you folks have not adopted or implemented the VT Alert program, you can always request that a VT Alert message be put out on your behalf via the the VEM watch officer. But we're going to get into why you should become and adopt and implement this program here in a little bit. So we have we kind of break this out here internally. VEM, we've talked about this a little bit. Just really for my brain and how I break things out is we have two real notification schemes. Our public broadcasts, which is my brain if I'm thinking the public and anyone that I train, new agencies, new municipalities that are coming on. If you're thinking public, your brain should go to that VT Alert organization. We've talked a little bit about that. With the information over here on the right, we have the iPause capability built in there, reverse E911 data. So every traditional landline in the state is updated quarterly through the enhanced 911 board, so that we have that kind of extra layer there, as well as our opt-in users, our web registered users, people that have gone in and created an account and signed up. And then we also have our group messaging, which is kind of all encompassing of the other organizations, which is really contact list driven. Phil, anything specific on this?
No, I think one thing to keep in mind too is that except in the case of public alerting for VT Alert, any information that's provided into Everbridge is going to be opt-in only, so to speak. So as your agencies or as you present back, the idea of using Everbridge, to the agency that you're a part of, the department you're a part of, there will be those questions around, well, what do you do with my device or my contact information? And if it's not owned by the agency or the device, anything that's provided is going to always be opt-in only. So in terms of privacy concerns and that sort of, what are you doing with my data? One thing to keep in mind, and that frequently comes up when we start a new deployment, any personal devices, emails, whatever it's going to be, that's always going to be stuff that someone has the chance to provide if they want to.
Yep, absolutely. Great point, Phil. So we've talked about the multiple organizations that we have. So VT Alert is one of these organizations, but as you can see here, and I'm not going to read through this list for you, but just a couple of highlights. Vermont Emergency Management, we have our own internal organization, as I said, for our State Emergency Operations Center activations, internal staff notifications, the Vermont State Police, as we've highlighted before, and VTrans for calling in staff during emergency situations. As you can see, we have quite a few, and within some of these, there's even a lot more organizations that fall within that, the nonprofit internal groups. That organization encompasses a vast amount of organizations and agencies and nonprofits there. So, and then if we were to get my dream in the future, all 251 towns and cities within the state of Vermont into that adopting VT Alert, all of those would live within that Vermont municipalities organization as an internal means of communicating with your staff. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what the system is, how we've kind of organized things, but we didn't really tell you what you can and can't send out. So just real quick, again, I'm not going to read this off because, as you can see, this list is very vast, and this is really specific to the VT Alert organization for our public safety messaging, public facing. So really, if you can, what I tell people, if you can paint it with the public safety brush, and if it passes that litmus test there, it's basically permitted messaging. And then just not permitted, you can't push out to the public via VT alert, your town meeting notices, town fair picnic notices. So if Rich is going to have his gathering down there in Dummerston, he can't push that out via VT alert. I know it's sad, but you'll live to grill another day, my friend. And then really one of the highlights here at the bottom is improper use of our reverse E911 data. So why should your municipality, why should your organization, your agency adopt VT Alert and implement it? Well, when we're really talking about public facing messaging, the VT Alert organization, municipalities, I mean, everything starts local and ends local. You guys are going to know your local emergencies far sooner than we are. And if you can get trained staff on hand that are able to send out that notification, that takes out a phone call, takes out a process delay on the back end of things, to push your notification out quickly. You, again, have access to the existing pool, that 32,000 and change number there, which we hope grows every day, which it does. And then also access to the reverse E911 data. And notifying your target population, your constituency, versus from a wide array of delivery methods, as we've already discussed here. And continuing on with, there is 24/7 support via Everbridge. And on that piece right there, Phil is our technical account manager. We have 20 hours a month across the Vermont account that we get Phil for. So if it's something that I can't quite figure out, I have Phil to lean on, and we talk multiple times throughout the week, I promise. And you also get me. This is my full-time job. I'm able to provide training, assist with your implementation process, address issues and concerns. I'm generally reachable at all times. I have my phone on me pretty much everywhere I go. You also have the ability to create templates for quick notifications so you can save them for on the fly. Everbridge is a web-based platform, so anywhere you have internet connection, you're able to send that information out. And then here on the screen, as you can see from my screen recording, there's also the Managed Bridge app, which enables dispatchers the ability to send notifications from the field, really from anywhere, again, where you have connection. Phil, any comments here, my friend?
Only that, again, we're as good as what we're built on. So if you're in the middle of the woods and you have no access to any connectivity, you probably won't be receiving any messages. You probably won't be sending any out as an administrator. But most of us, I would say now, day to day, have access to some connectivity. So, odds are you'll be able to send out that alert if you need to. And again, I'm here, Ian's here. So as you guys go through and put these things together, these new systems, these new deployments, we'll walk you through it all. Make sure you feel comfortable, get you trained up, train up the other staff. So there's a lot of value here for you to take advantage of as a new deployment. Make sure you guys feel comfortable.
All right, and really the big question I think you all are asking, right, is how do you become a dispatcher? So your agency or municipality will have to complete the implementation process. Excuse me, I'm tripping over my words here. You need to have access to a computer or a smartphone. Again, you're not going to be able to send anything out if you can't connect. Be a trusted individual with your agency or municipality authorization. So they have to say to me that it's okay for you to send that out. And then you got to complete the dispatcher training offered by myself. Phil sometimes jumps in and helps out, or by your agency or municipality. If you're currently working for a municipality that has already implemented VT Alert, those that have been trained can train you. But again, I'm always here to help. Typically it takes about 60 to 90 minutes to complete. It's a lot, especially if it's something that you're not used to doing, kind of on the front end. But as you get more versed and more of a veteran, things become pretty easy. So, and we'll just kind of talk real briefly about the implementation process. Basically, we just set up a quick meeting with myself and your municipality or your agency. We just discuss the system, how the process plays out, address any specific needs or concerns. It's about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how much content we have to go over in the moment, or any questions that you bring to the table. The organization, municipality officially adopts the use of VT Alert as a notification tool. So the governing body of that organization or municipality has to sign off on it. For most municipalities, that's going to be your select board. And then you designate local administrator or administrators is really my go-to, my points of contact when I get requests for new dispatcher access. If we have any issues, I usually go right to those folks. And then we set up some time for training. Again, about an hour to an hour and a half. Can be quick, can be a little longer. I really want to make sure that you folks have all the tools in your toolkit so you can complete the job. I don't want to leave you thinking and wondering more down the road. In a public awareness campaign, Phil's touched on this, we can only be as successful as the ground in which we're built on. So we can deploy this, we can implement this vast and wide, but if we don't have people receiving that information, really what good are we doing? And that's really on the municipality. We can assist that, but we got to inform our residents and to sign up. And then ongoing is the maintenance of the system. Myself and Phil, we work in making sure that the system's maintained. Everbridge works really hard about pushing updates and correcting issues. I offer refresher trainings, and I really do encourage them. It is a perishable skill. And then we can, we just remove or add new dispatchers. And then for the last piece there, we do deploy an internal group setup that the adopting organization is ultimately responsible for maintaining that contact data. All right, Phil, let's talk about just real briefly, because I know that I benefit greatly from knowing what other surrounding areas are doing. How about some other deployments of Everbridge?
Yep. So some of these were kind of mentioned in the bio, but you'll see the logos here. Across Vermont first, most locally. We do work with VDH. We did support some of the COVID contact tracing during the height of the COVID pandemic up in the state. So we worked with the Han to help with that and a couple of other things. We do support the Department of Corrections pretty extensively, both internally for their staff as well as a public alerting capability in the event of an escaped convict. Kind of the most immediate use case there. CT Alert, Notify NYC, Alerts MA, Alert Boston, all are similarly structured alerting capabilities. So public alerting, branded, known throughout the state, hopefully, as a resource to residents and the folks that live there. Let's see, WMATA is Washington Metro Area Transit Authority, so all of the trains that run in DC. The National Capital Region, NCR, they have many different branded versions of NCR alerting. So anytime you're down in DC, you can go ahead and opt into those alerts as a guest. And then State of Oregon, or Alert, we have the state of California, we have the state of Florida. So the list kind of goes on and on. So in the event that, you're not really sure where to start, are we someone that could, use Everbridge for something? Odds are someone somewhere has already tried, tried to use it for the agency that you're a part of or a similarly structured agency. We do pull a lot for messaging and use cases across the technical account manager team. So each one of these that you see has a TAM aligned to it. So I, again, support Notify NYC, Alerts MA, the state of Vermont, city of Boston, all of the agencies within it. So, I can take my questions and go to the TAM for Connecticut and say, hey, how would you do it, down in your state, or have you already done it? Could we do it up in Vermont, right? And we provide coverage for each other and all these things. So lots of things we can pull from, lots of agencies and groups that are already using it, and we're adding more every day. So odds are we can find you some way to start. And you guys have been a leader, like I said, for quite a while at the state level. So I would expect that, any ideas that you guys have going forward, but the equitable messaging piece, again, is another one that's coming to mind. We'll be able to support that and continue to have Vermont be one of the leaders.
And as Phil alluded to, we do have some equitable messaging kind of on the forefront here. With that kind of brings a simplified process of notification using a little bit of a different process. It's called the incident model, where we have predefined templates where it takes a lot of that training down. And predefined templates really help drive that equitable messaging. Automated weather alerting in line with the newest NWS advisories. That happens as we move on and as things change. Air quality alerts, that's actually implemented. That's something that I worked with the Department of Environmental Conservation on. So go in and subscribe if you already have an account, and update your subscription plans. Additional municipal implementation. I want to grow the system to be more robust. So if you are a municipality and you're unsure, or that you're not, and you would like to implement VT Alert, contact me. And also, as Phil has alluded to, contact myself. If you have something on the mind, maybe we can help your organization, your municipality with implementation and rollout. So in respect for everyone's time, I did have a demonstration planned, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. It's near the end of the day, and I wasn't sure how many people were still on. So we will skip ahead to that. We'll save questions here for the lobby. I will be over there. I assume Phil will join me as well for any of your questions. And here's our contact information. So my work email address, that is my work cell phone. Send me a text, shoot me a phone call, shoot me an email, and likewise for Phil over there on the right. And Phil, anything lasting before I turn it back over to Rich? I know he's itching to be the maestro here.
Just thank you. Thank you for letting me be a part of Vermont and, leading the way as one of our original state deployments. We talk about you guys a lot at Everbridge. Back during COVID, when the state legislature altered the state constitution to allow for remote voting, we were lucky enough to power that and be a part of that process. So shout out to Chief Romy if he's on here. So thank you. Yeah, you guys have been a phenomenal account. Hopefully someday I'll get to come back up and visit and say hello to everybody again. But in the meantime, I'm just to yourself. So looking forward to meeting with you all.
And also thank you all for your attention, all your hard work out there. Thanks again, and reach out with any questions that you have. Back to you, my friend Rich.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Phil. I'm one of the people that uses Vermont Alert quite a bit, so I can tell you it's always valuable to hear them speak about the capabilities and things. Hopefully you all are signed up for that. If you haven't, go over and sign up. All right, couple things real quick before we end for the day. One, if you want to ask Ian or Phil some questions, as I said, you can head over to the virtual lobby. You can chat with them. Harry will be there managing that. Emily just posted that link in the chat, so you can head over there and talk. Finally, this was day 1. Thank you. This was awesome. I'm so excited to see day 2 and day 3 tomorrow and Thursday. So tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel, the same links for the conference presentations as well as the lobby are in use for tomorrow. So you don't have to learn anything else. You don't have to find that email that you may have thought you saw. It's the same links as today. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Stephanie Smith talking about hazard mitigation. Jan Soterakis and I will be chatting about how to operate a virtual EOC, something I think some of you may have had some experience with. Then we're going to hear from Brett LaRose about the Watch Officer program and how do you get a hold of us after hours. And finally, we're going to talk to John Cammerfort and Halcyon Brown about digital tool for mapping fire department response times and access to water resources across Vermont. So exciting day tomorrow, and even more exciting day on Thursday, where we reveal our EMD of the year. Thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to all of the staff that have helped out and worked on this conference so far. We can't wait to talk to you all again tomorrow. So thank you very much. You can make your way over to the lobby. See you tomorrow.